Welcome to Soft Hour Library. Tonight's story begins now. Close your eyes and rest.
The Murder on the Links by Agatha Christie. To my husband, a fellow enthusiast for detective stories, and to whom I am indebted for much helpful advice and criticism. Chapter 1: A Fellow Traveler. I believe that a well-known anecdote exists to the effect that a young writer, determined to make the commencement of his story forcible and original enough to catch and rivet the attention of the most blasé of editors, pennied the following sentence. "Hell," said the Duchess. Strangely enough, this tale of mine opens in much the same fashion. Only the lady who gave utterance to the exclamation was not a duchess. It was a day in early June. I had been transacting some business in Paris and was returning by the morning service to London, where I was still sharing rooms with my old friend, the Belgian ex-detective Hercule Poirot. The Calais Express was singularly empty. In fact, my own compartment held only one other traveler. I had made a somewhat hurried departure from the hotel and was busy assuring myself that I had duly collected all my traps when the train started. Up till then, I had hardly noticed my companion, but I was now violently recalled to the fact of her existence. Jumping up from her seat, she let down the window and stuck her head out, withdrawing it a moment later with the brief and forcible ejaculation, "Hell." Now I am old-fashioned. A woman, I consider, should be womanly. I have no patience with the modern neurotic girl who jazzes from morning to night, smokes like a chimney, and uses language which would make a Billingsgate fishwoman blush. I looked up now, frowning slightly, into a pretty, impudent face, surmounted by a rakish little red hat. A thick cluster of black curls hid each ear. I judged that she was little more than 17, but her face was covered with powder, and her lips were quite impossibly scarlet. Nothing abashed, she returned my glance and executed an expressive grimace. "Dear me, we've shocked the kind." "Gentlemen," she observed to an imaginary audience, "I apologize for my language, most unladylike and all that, but oh Lord, there's reason enough for it. Do you know I've lost my only sister?" "Really," I said politely, "how unfortunate." "He disapproves," remarked the lady. "He disapproves utterly of me and my sister, which last is unfair because he hasn't seen her." I opened my mouth, but she forestalled me. "Say no more, nobody loves me. I shall go into the garden and eat worms. Boo-hoo, I am crushed." She buried herself behind a large comic French paper. In a minute or two I saw her eyes stealthily peeping at me over the top. In spite of myself, I could not help smiling, and in a minute she had tossed the paper aside and had burst into a merry peal of laughter. "I knew you weren't such a mutt as you looked," she cried. Her laughter was so infectious that I could not help joining in, though I hardly cared for the word mutt. The girl was certainly all that I most disliked, but that was no reason why I should make myself ridiculous by my attitude. I prepared to unbend. After all, she was decidedly pretty. "There, now we're friends," declared the minx. "Say you're sorry about my sister." "I am desolated." "That's a good boy." "Let me finish. I was going to add that, although I am desolated, I can manage to put up with her absence very well." I made a little bow. But this most unaccountable of damsels frowned and shook her head. "Cut it out, I prefer the dignified disapproval stunt." "Oh, your face, not one of us," it said, "and you were right there, though mind you, it's pretty hard to tell nowadays. It's not everyone who can distinguish between a demi and a duchess. There now, I believe I've shocked you again. You've been dug out of the backwoods, you have, not that I mind that. We could do with a few more of your sort. I just hate a fellow who gets fresh. It makes me mad." She shook her head vigorously. "What are you like when you're mad?" I inquired with a smile. A regular little devil, don't care what I say or what I do either. I nearly did a chap in once. Yes, really, he'd have deserved it too. Italian blood I've got. I shall get into trouble one of these days. Well, I begged, don't get mad with me. I shan't, I like you, did the first moment I set eyes on you, but you looked so disapproving that I never thought we should make friends. Well, we have. Tell me something about yourself. I'm an actress. No, not the kind you're thinking of, lunching at the Savoy covered with jewelry and with their photograph in every paper saying how much they love Madame So-and-so's face cream. I've been on the boards since I was a kid of 6, tumbling. I beg your pardon, I said, puzzled. Haven't you seen child acrobats? Oh, I understand. I'm American-born, but I've spent most of my life in England. We got a new show now. My sister and I sort of song and dance, and a bit of patter, and a dash of the old business thrown in. It's quite a new idea, and it hits them every time. There's to be money in it. My new acquaintance leaned forward and discoursed volubly, a great many of her terms being quite unintelligible to me. Yet I found myself evincing an increasing interest in her. She seemed such a curious mixture of child and woman. Though perfectly worldly wise, and able, as she expressed it, to take care of herself, there was yet something curiously ingenuous in her single-minded attitude towards life and her wholehearted determination to make good. This glimpse of a world unknown to me was not without its charm, and I enjoyed seeing her vivid little face light up as she talked. We passed through Amiens. The name awakened many memories. My companion seemed to have an intuitive knowledge of what was in my mind. Thinking of the war. I nodded. You were through it, I suppose. Pretty well. I was wounded once, and after the Somme they invalided me out altogether. I had a half-fledged army job for a bit. I'm a sort of private secretary now to an MP. My, that's brainy. No, it is. There's really awfully little to do. Usually a couple of hours every day sees me through. It's dull work too. In fact, I don't know what I should do if I hadn't got something to fall back upon. Don't say you collect bugs. No, I share rooms with a very interesting man. He's a Belgian, an ex-detective. He's set up as a private detective in London, and he's doing extraordinarily well. He's really a very marvelous little man. Time and again, he has proved to be right where the official police have failed. My companion listened with widening eyes. Isn't that interesting now? I just adore crime. I go to all the mysteries on the movies, and when there's a murder on, I just devour the papers. Do you remember the Styles case? I asked. Let me see, was that the old lady who was poisoned, somewhere down in Essex? I nodded. That was Poirot's first big case. Undoubtedly, but for him, the murderer would have escaped scot-free. It was a most wonderful bit of detective work. Warming to my subject, I ran over the heads of the affair, working up to the triumphant and unexpected denouement. The girl listened spellbound. In fact, we were so absorbed that the train drew into Calais station before we realized it. My goodness gracious me, cried my companion, where's my powder puff? She proceeded to bedaub her face liberally, and then applied a stick of lip salve to her lips, observing the effect in a small pocket glass and betraying not the faintest sign of self-consciousness. I say, I hesitated. I dare say it's cheek on my part, but why do all that sort of thing? The girl paused in her operations and stared at me with undisguised surprise. It isn't as though you weren't so pretty that you can afford to do without it, I said stammeringly. My dear boy, I've got to do it, all the girls do think I want to look like a little frump-up from the country. She took one last look in the mirror, smiled approval, and put it and her vanity box away in her bag. That's better. Keeping up appearances is a bit of a fag, I grant, but if a girl respects herself, it's up to her not to let herself get slack. To this essentially moral sentiment, I had no reply. A point of view makes a great difference. I secured a couple of porters, and we alighted on the platform. My companion held out her hand. Goodbye, and I'll mind my language better in future. Oh, but surely you'll let me look after you on the boat. Mayn't be on the boat. I've got to see whether that sister of mine got aboard after all anywhere, but thanks all the same. Oh, but we're going to meet again, surely. I hesitated. I want to meet your sister. We both laughed. That's real nice of you. I'll tell her what you say, but I don't fancy we'll meet again. You've been very good to me on the journey, especially after I cheeked you as I did. But what your face expressed first thing is quite true. I'm not your kind, and that brings trouble. I know that well enough. Her face changed. For the moment, all the light-hearted gaiety died out of it. It looked angry, revengeful. So goodbye, she finished, in a lighter tone. Aren't you even going to tell me your name? I cried, as she turned away. She looked over her shoulder. A dimple appeared in each cheek. She was like a lovely picture by Greuze. Cinderella, she said, and laughed. But little did I think, when and how I should see Cinderella again. Chapter 2, An Appeal for Help. It was 5 minutes past 9 when I entered our joint sitting room for breakfast on the following morning. My friend Poirot, exact to the minute as usual, was just tapping the shell of his second egg. He beamed upon me as I entered. You have slept well, yes. You have recovered from the crossing so terrible, it is a marvel. Almost you are exact this morning. Pardon, but your tie is not symmetrical. Permit that I rearrange him. Elsewhere I have described Hercule Poirot, an extraordinary little man, height 5 feet 4 inches, egg-shaped head carried a little to one side, eyes that shone green when he was excited, stiff military moustache, air of dignity immense. He was neat and dandified in appearance. For neatness of any kind, he had an absolute passion. To see an ornament set crooked, or a speck of dust, or a slight disarray in one's attire, was torture to the little man until he could ease his feelings by remedying the matter. Order and method were his gods. He had a certain disdain for tangible evidence, such as footprints and cigarette ash, and would maintain that, taken by themselves, they would never enable a detective to solve a problem. Then he would tap his egg-shaped head with absurd complacency and remark with great satisfaction, "The true work, it is done from within. The little grey cells, remember always the little grey cells, Mon Army." I slipped into my seat and remarked idly, in answer to Poirot's greeting, that an hour's sea passage from Calais to Dover could hardly be dignified by the epithet terrible. Poirot waved his egg spoon in vigorous refutation of my remark. Do tout, if for an hour one experiences sensations and emotions of the most terrible, one has lived many hours. Does not one of your English poets say that time is counted, not by hours, but by heartbeats? I fancy Browning was referring to something more romantic than seasickness, though. Because he was an Englishman, an islander to whom La Manche was nothing. Oh, you English, with nous autres it is different. Figure to yourself that a lady of my acquaintance at the beginning of the war fled to Ostend. There she had a terrible crisis of the nerves, impossible to escape further except by crossing the sea, and she had a horror, mais une horreur, of the sea. What was she to do? Daily less Boches were drawing nearer. Imagine to yourself the terrible situation. What did she do? I inquired curiously. Fortunately, her husband was homme pratique. He was also very calm. The crises of the nerves, they affected him not. Il la emportait simplement. Naturally, when she reached England, she was prostrate, but she still breathed. Poirot shook his head seriously. I composed my face as best I could. Suddenly he stiffened and pointed a dramatic finger at the toast rack. "Ah, par exemple, c'est trop fort," he cried. "What is it?" "This piece of toast. You remark him not." He whipped the offender out of the rack and held it up for me to examine. "Is it square? No. Is it a triangle? Again no. Is it even round? No. Is it of any shape remotely pleasing to the eye? What symmetry have we here? None." "It's cut from a cottage loaf," I explained soothingly. Poirot threw me a withering glance. "What an intelligence has my friend Hastings," he exclaimed sarcastically. "Comprehend you not that I have forbidden such a loaf haphazard and shapeless, that no baker should permit himself to bake?" I endeavored to distract his mind. "Anything interesting come by the post?" Poirot shook his head with a dissatisfied air. "I have not yet examined my letters, but nothing of interest arrives nowadays. The great criminals, the criminals of method, they do not exist. The cases I have been employed upon lately were banal to the last degree. In verity, I am reduced to recovering lost lapdogs for fashionable ladies. The last problem that presented any interest was that intricate little affair of the Yardley diamond, and that was, how many months ago, my friend?" He shook his head despondently, and I roared with laughter. "Cheer up, Poirot, the luck will change. Open your letters. For all you know, there may be a great case looming on the horizon." Poirot smiled, and taking up the neat little letter opener with which he opened his correspondence, he slit the tops of the several envelopes that lay by his plate. "A bill, another bill. It is that I grow extravagant in my old age. Aha, a note from Jap." Yes, pricked up my ears. The Scotland Yard inspector had more than once introduced us to an interesting case. He merely thanks me, in his fashion, for a little point in the Aberystwyth case on which I was able to set him right. I am delighted to have been of service to him. "How does he thank you?" I asked curiously, for I knew my Jap. "He is kind enough to say that I am a wonderful sport for my age, and that he was glad to have had the chance of letting me in on the case." This was so typical of Jap that I could not forbear a chuckle. Poirot continued to read his correspondence placidly. "A suggestion that I should give a lecture to our local Boy Scouts. The Countess of Forfenock will be obliged if I will call and see her. Another lapdog without doubt. And now for the last. Ah." I looked up, quick to notice the change of tone. Poirot was reading attentively. In a minute he tossed the sheet over to me. "This is out of the ordinary Mon Army. Read for yourself." The letter was written on a foreign type of paper, in a bold, characteristic hand. "Villa Genevieve, Merlinville-sur-Mer, France. Dear Sir, I am in need of the services of a detective, and for reasons which I will give you later, do not wish to call in the official police. I have heard of you from several quarters, and all reports go to show that you are not only a man of decided ability, but one who also knows how to be discreet. I do not wish to trust details to the post, but on account of a secret I possess, I go in daily fear of my life. I am convinced that the danger is imminent, and therefore I beg that you will lose no time in crossing to France. I will send a car to meet you at Calais if you will wire me when you are arriving. I shall be obliged if you will drop all cases you have on hand and devote yourself solely to my interests. I am prepared to pay any compensation necessary. I shall probably need your services for a considerable period of time, as it may be necessary for you to go out to Santiago, where I spent several years of my life. I shall be content for you to name your own fee, assuring you once more that the matter is urgent. Yours faithfully, P.T. Renaud. Below the signature was a hastily scrawled line, almost illegible. For God's sake, come. I handed the letter back with quickened pulses. At last, I said, here is something distinctly out of the ordinary. Yes, indeed, said Poirot meditatively. You will go, of course, I continued. Poirot nodded. He was thinking deeply. Finally, he seemed to make up his mind and glanced up at the clock. His face was very grave. See you, my friend, there is no time to lose. The Continental Express leaves Victoria at 11 o'clock. Do not agitate yourself. There is plenty of time. We can allow 10 minutes for discussion. You accompany me, NSC Pa. Well, you told me yourself that your employer needed you not for the next few weeks. Oh, that's all right, but this Mr. Renaud hints strongly that his business is private. Ta-ta-ta, I will manage M. Renaud. By the way, I seem to know the name. There's a well-known South American millionaire fellow. His name's Renaud. I don't know whether it could be the same. But without doubt, that explains the mention of Santiago. Santiago is in Chile, and Chile it is in South America. Ah, but we progress finely. Dear me, Poirot, I said, my excitement rising, I smell some goodly shekels in this. If we succeed, we shall make our fortunes. Do not be too sure of that, my friend. A rich man and his money are not so easily parted. I have seen a well-known millionaire turn out a tramful of people to seek for a dropped halfpenny. I acknowledged the wisdom of this. In any case, continued Poirot, it is not the money which attracts me here. Certainly it will be pleasant to have carte blanche in our investigations. One can be sure that way of wasting no time, but it is something a little bizarre in this problem which arouses my interest. You remarked the postscript. How did it strike you? I considered. Clearly he wrote the letter keeping himself well in hand, but at the end his self-control snapped, and on the impulse of the moment he scrawled those 4 desperate words. But my friend shook his head energetically. You are in error. See you not that while the ink of the signature is nearly black, that of the postscript is quite pale? Well, I said, puzzled. Mon dear mon ami, but use your little grey cells. Is it not obvious? M. Renaud wrote his letter. Without blotting it, he reread it carefully. Then, not on impulse, but deliberately, he added those last words and blotted the sheet. But why? Parbleu, so that it should produce the effect upon me that it has upon you. What? Mais oui, to make sure of my coming. He reread the letter and was dissatisfied. It was not strong enough. He paused and then added softly, his eyes shining with that green light that always betokened inward excitement. And so, mon ami, since that postscript was added, not on impulse, but soberly in cold blood, the urgency is very great, and we must reach him as soon as possible. Merlinville, I murmured thoughtfully. I've heard of it, I think. Poirot nodded. It is a quiet little place, but chic. It lies about midway between Bologna and Calais. It is rapidly becoming the fashion. Rich English people who wish to be quiet are taking it up. M. Renaud has a house in England, I suppose. Yes, in Rutland Gate, as far as I remember. Also a big place in the country, somewhere in Hertfordshire. But I really know very little about him. He doesn't do much in a social way. I believe he has large South American interests in the city and has spent most of his life out in Chile and the Argentino. Well, we shall hear all details from the man himself. Come, let us pack. A small suitcase each, and then a taxi to Victoria. And the Countess? I inquired with a smile. RGMN fiche. Her case was certainly not interesting. Why so sure of that? Because in that case she would have come, not written. A woman cannot wait. Always remember that, Hastings. 11 o'clock saw our departure from Victoria on our way to Dover. Before starting, Poirot had dispatched a telegram to Mr. Renauld giving the time of our arrival at Calais. "I'm surprised you haven't invested in a few bottles of some sea-sick remedy, Poirot," I observed maliciously as I recalled our conversation at breakfast. My friend, who was anxiously scanning the weather, turned a reproachful face upon me. "Is it that you have forgotten the method most excellent of Lavagaya? His system, I practice it always. One balances oneself, if you remember, turning the head from left to right, breathing in and out, counting 6 between each breath." I demurred. "You'll be rather tired of balancing yourself and counting 6 by the time you get to Santiago or Buenos Aires or wherever it is you land." "Quelle idée, you do not figure to yourself that I shall go to Santiago. Mr. Renauld suggests it in his letter. He did not know the methods of Hercule Poirot. I do not run to and fro, making journeys and agitating myself. My work is done from within here." He tapped his forehead significantly. As usual, this remark roused my argumentative faculty. "It's all very well, Poirot, but I think you are falling into the habit of despising certain things too much. A fingerprint has led sometimes to the arrest and conviction of a murderer, and has, without doubt, hanged more than one innocent man," remarked Poirot dryly. "But surely the study of fingerprints and footprints, cigarette ash, different kinds of mud, and other clues that comprise the minute observation of details, all these are of vital importance. But certainly, I have never said otherwise. The trained observer, the expert, without doubt he is useful, but the others, the Hercules Poirots, they are above the experts. To them the experts bring the facts. Their business is the method of the crime, its logical deduction, the proper sequence and order of the facts. Above all, the true psychology of the case. You have hunted the fox, yes." "I have hunted a bit, now and again," I said, rather bewildered by this abrupt change of subject. "Why?" "Bien, this hunting of the fox, you need the dogs, no?" "Hounds," I corrected gently. "Yes, of course." "But yet," Poirot wagged his finger at me, "you did not descend from your horse and run along the ground smelling with your nose and uttering loud ow-ows." In spite of myself, I laughed immoderately. Poirot nodded in a satisfied manner. "You leave the work of the D-hounds to the hounds, yet you demand that I, Hercule Poirot, should make myself ridiculous by lying down, possibly on damp grass, to study hypothetical footprints, and should scoop up cigarette ash when I do not know one kind from the other. Remember the Plymouth Express mystery. The good Jap departed to make a survey of the railway line. When he returned, I, without having moved from my apartments, was able to tell him exactly what he had found." "So you are of the opinion that Jap wasted his time?" "Not at all, since his evidence confirmed my theory, but I should have wasted my time if I had gone. It is the same with so-called experts. Remember the handwriting testimony in the Cavendish case. One counsel's questioning brings out testimony as to the resemblances, the defense brings evidence to show dissimilarity. All the language is very technical, and the result, what we all knew in the first place." Writing was very like that of John Cavendish, and the psychological mind is faced with the question, why? Because it was actually his, or because someone wished us to think it was his? I answered that question, mon ami, and answered it correctly. And Poirot, having effectually silenced, if not convinced me, leaned back with a satisfied air. On the boat, I knew better than to disturb my friend's solitude. The weather was gorgeous, and the sea as smooth as the proverbial mill pond, so I was hardly surprised to hear that Lavagaya's method had once more justified itself when a smiling Poirot joined me on disembarking at Calais. A disappointment was in store for us, as no car had been sent to meet us, but Poirot put this down to his telegram having been delayed in transit. Since it is carte blanche, "We will hire a car," he said cheerfully, and a few minutes later saw us creaking and jolting along in the most ramshackle of automobiles that ever plied for hire in the direction of Merlinville. My spirits were at their highest. "What gorgeous air!" I exclaimed. "This promises to be a delightful trip." "For you, yes. For me, I have work to do, remember, at our journey's end." "Bah," I said cheerfully. "You will discover all, ensure this Mr. Renaud's safety, run the would-be assassins to earth, and all will finish in a blaze of glory." "You are sanguine, my friend." "Yes, I feel absolutely assured of success. Are you not the one and only Hercule Poirot?" But my little friend did not rise to the bait. He was observing me gravely. "You are what the Scotch people call fey, Hastings. It presages disaster." "Nonsense. At any rate, you do not share my feelings." "No, but I am afraid." "Afraid of what?" "I do not know, but I have a premonition, a je ne sais quoi." He spoke so gravely that I was impressed in spite of myself. "I have a feeling," he said slowly, "that this is going to be a big affair, a long, troublesome problem. That will not be easy to work out." I would have questioned him further, but we were just coming into the little town of Merlinville, and we slowed up to inquire the way to the Villa Genevieve. "Straight on, monsieur, through the town. The Villa Genevieve is about half a mile the other side. You cannot miss it. A big villa overlooking the sea." We thanked our informant and drove on, leaving the town behind. A fork in the road brought us to a second halt. A peasant was trudging towards us, and we waited for him to come up to us in order to ask the way again. There was a tiny villa standing right by the road, but it was too small and dilapidated to be the one we wanted. As we waited, the gate of it swung open and a girl came out. The peasant was passing us now, and the driver leaned forward from his seat and asked for direction. "The Villa Genevieve, just a few steps up this road to the right, monsieur. You could see it if it were not for the curve." The chauffeur thanked him and started the car again. My eyes were fascinated by the girl who still stood, with one hand on the gate, watching us. I am an admirer of beauty, and here was one whom nobody could have passed without remark. Very tall, with the proportions of a young goddess, her uncovered golden head gleaming in the sunlight, I swore to myself that she was one of the most beautiful girls I had ever seen. As we swung up the rough road, I turned my head to look after her. "By Jove, Poirot," I exclaimed, "did you see that young goddess?" Poirot raised his eyebrows. "Ça commence," he murmured. "Already you have seen a goddess. But hang it all, was she?" "Possibly. I did not remark the fact." "Surely you noticed her?" "Mon ami, two people rarely see the same thing. You, for instance, saw a goddess." He hesitated. "Yes, I saw only a girl with anxious eyes," said Poirot gravely. But at that moment we drew up at a big green gate, and simultaneously we both uttered an exclamation. Before it stood an imposing Sergeant de Ville. He held up his hand to bar our way. "You cannot pass, messieurs." "But we wish to see Mr. Renaud," I cried. "We have an appointment. This is his villa, isn't it?" "Yes, monsieur, but—" Poirot leaned forward. "But what?" "M. Renaud was murdered this morning." Chapter 3. At the Villa Genevieve. In a moment Poirot had leapt from the car, his eyes blazing with excitement. He caught the man by the shoulder. "What is that you say, murdered, when, how?" The Sergeant de Ville drew himself up. "I cannot answer any questions, monsieur." "True, I comprehend." Poirot reflected for a minute. "The commissary of police, he is without doubt within." "Yes, monsieur." Poirot took out a card and scribbled a few words on it. "Voilà, Will you have the goodness to see that this card is sent in to the commissary at once?" The man took it and, turning his head over his shoulder, whistled. In a few seconds a comrade joined him and was handed Poirot's message. There was a wait of some minutes, and then a short, stout man with a huge moustache came bustling down to the gate. The Sergeant de Ville saluted and stood aside. "My dear M. Poirot," cried the newcomer, "I am delighted to see you. Your arrival is most opportune." Poirot's face had lighted up. "M. Bex, this is indeed a pleasure." He turned to me. "This is an English friend of mine, Captain Hastings, M. Lucian Bex." The commissary and I bowed to each other ceremoniously. Then M. Bex turned once more to Poirot. "Mon vieux, I have not seen you since 1909, that time in Ostend. I heard that you had left the force." "So I have. I run a private business in London." "And you say you have information to give which may assist us." "Possibly you know it already. You were aware that I had been sent for." "No, by whom?" "The dead man. It seems he knew an attempt was going to be made on his life. Unfortunately, he sent for me too late." "Sacré tonnerre," ejaculated the Frenchman. "So he foresaw his own murder. That upsets our theories considerably, but come inside." He held the gate open, and we commenced walking towards the house. M. Bex continued to talk. "The examining magistrate, M. Hortet, must hear of this at once. He has just finished examining the scene of the crime and is about to begin his interrogations. A charming man. You will like him, most sympathetic, original in his methods, but an excellent judge." "When was the crime committed?" asked Poirot. "The body was discovered this morning about 9 o'clock. Madame Renaud's evidence and that of the doctors goes to show that the death must have occurred about 2 a.m., but enter, I pray of you." We had arrived at the steps which led up to the front door of the villa. In the hall, another Sergeant de Ville was sitting. He rose at sight of the commissary. "Where is M. Hortet now?" inquired the latter. "In the salon, monsieur." M. Bex opened a door to the left of the hall, and we passed in. M. Hortet and his clerk were sitting at a big round table. They looked up as we entered. The commissary introduced us and explained our presence. M. Hortet, the judged instruction, was a tall, gaunt man with piercing dark eyes and a neatly cut grey beard, which he had a habit of caressing as he talked. Standing by the mantelpiece was an elderly man with slightly stooping shoulders who was introduced to us as Dr. Durand. "Most extraordinary," remarked M. Hortet as the commissary finished speaking. "You have the letter here, monsieur." Poirot handed it to him, and the magistrate read it. He speaks of a secret. What a pity he was not more explicit. We are much indebted to you, M. Poirot. I hope you will do us the honor of assisting us in our investigations, or are you obliged to return to London? M. le Juge, I propose to remain. I did not arrive in time to prevent my client's death, but I feel myself bound in honor to discover the assassin. The magistrate bowed. These sentiments do you honor. Also, without doubt, Madame Renaud will wish to retain your services. We are expecting M. Giraud from the Sûreté in Paris any moment, and I am sure that you and he will be able to give each other mutual assistance in your investigations. In the meantime, I hope that you will do me the honor to be present at my interrogations, and I need hardly say that if there is any assistance you require, it is at your disposal. I thank you, monsieur. You will comprehend that at present I am completely in the dark. I know nothing whatever. M. Hortet nodded to the commissary, and the latter took up the tale. This morning the old servant Francaise, on descending to start her work, found the front door ajar. Feeling a momentary alarm as to burglars, she looked into the dining room, but seeing the silver was safe she thought no more about it. concluding that her master had, without doubt, risen early and gone for a stroll. "Pardon, monsieur, for interrupting, but was that a common practice of his?" "No, it was not, but old Francis has the common idea as regards the English, that they are mad and liable to do the most unaccountable things at any moment." Going to call her mistress as usual, a younger maid, Leonie, was horrified to discover her gagged and bound, and almost at the same moment news was brought that M. Renaud's body had been discovered, stone dead, stabbed in the back. "Well, that is one of the most extraordinary features of the case. M. Poirot, the body was lying, face downwards, in an open grave." "What?" "Yes, the pit was freshly dug, just a few yards outside the boundary of the villa grounds." "And he had been dead how long?" Dr. Durand answered this. "I examined the body this morning at 10 o'clock. Death must have taken place at least 7 and possibly 10 hours previously." That fixes it at between midnight and 3 a.m. "Exactly, and Madame Renaud's evidence places it at after 2 a.m., which narrows the field still further. Death must have been instantaneous, and naturally could not have been self-inflicted." Poirot nodded, and the commissary resumed. "Madame Renaud was hastily freed from the cords that bound her by the horrified servants. She was in a terrible condition of weakness, almost unconscious from the pain of her bonds. It appears that 2 masked men entered the bedroom, gagged and bound her, whilst forcibly abducting her husband. This we know at second hand from the servants. On hearing the tragic news, she fell at once into an alarming state of agitation. On arrival, Dr. Durand immediately prescribed a sedative, and we have not yet been able to question her. But without doubt, she will awake more calm and be equal to bearing the strain of the interrogation." The commissary paused. "And the inmates of the house, monsieur?" "There is old Frances, the housekeeper. She lived for many years with the former owners of the Villa Genevieve. Then there are 2 young girls, sisters, Denise and Leonie Oulard. Their home is in Merlinville, and they come of the most respectable parents. Then there is the chauffeur whom M. Renaud brought over from England with him, but he is away on a holiday. Finally, there are Madame Renaud and her son, M. Jacques Renaud. He, too, is away from home at present." Poirot bowed his head. M. Hortet spoke. "Marchot." The Sergeant de Ville appeared. "Bring in the woman Frances." The man saluted and disappeared. In a moment or two he returned, escorting the frightened Frances. "Your name is Frances Richard?" "Yes, monsieur." "You have been a long time in service at the Villa Genevieve." 11 years with Madame la Vicomtesse. Then, when she sold the villa this spring, I consented to remain on with the English miler. Never did I imagine." The magistrate cut her short. Without doubt, without doubt. Now, Frances, in this matter of the front door, whose business was it to fasten it at night?" "Mine, monsieur. Always I saw to it myself." "And last night?" "I fastened it as usual." "You are sure of that?" "I swear it by the blessed saints, monsieur." "What time would that be?" "The same time as usual, 10:30, monsieur." "What about the rest of the household? Had they gone up to bed?" "Madame had retired some time before. Denise and Leonie went up with me. Monsieur was still in his study." "Then, if anyone unfastened the door afterwards, it must have been M. Renaud himself." Frances shrugged her broad shoulders. "What should he do that for? With robbers and assassins passing every minute. A nice idea. Monsieur was not an imbecile. It is not as though he had had to let cette dame out." The magistrate interrupted sharply. "Cette dame? What lady do you mean?" "Why, the lady who came to see him." "Had a lady been to see him that evening?" But yes, monsieur, and many other evenings as well. Who was she? Did you know her? A rather cunning look spread over the woman's face. How should I know who it was? She grumbled. I did not let her in last night. Aha, roared the examining magistrate, bringing his hand down with a bang on the table. You would trifle with the police, would you? I demand that you tell me at once the name of this woman who came to visit M. Renaud in the evenings. The police, grumbled Francois. Never did I think that I should be mixed up with the police, but I know well enough who she was. It was Madame d'Aubruil. The commissary uttered an exclamation and leaned forward as though in utter astonishment. Madame d'Aubruil, from the Villa Marguerite just down the road. That is what I said, monsieur. Oh, she is a pretty one, celle-là. The old woman tossed her head scornfully. Madame d'Aubruil, murmured the commissary. Impossible. Voila, grumbled Francois. That is all you get for telling the truth. Not at all, said the examining magistrate soothingly. We were surprised, that is all. Madame d'Aubruil then, and Monsieur Renaud, they were, he paused delicately. It was that without doubt. How should I know, but what will you? Monsieur, he was Mila Anglais, très rich, and Madame d'Aubruil, she was poor that one, and très chic for all that she lived so quietly with her daughter. Not a doubt of it, she has had her history. She is no longer young, but ma foi, I who speak to you have seen the men's heads turn after her as she goes down the street. Besides, lately, she has had more money to spend, all the town knows it. The little economies, they are at an end. And Francois shook her head with an air of unalterable certainty. M. Hortet stroked his beard reflectively. And Madame Renaud, he asked at length, how did she take this friendship? Francois shrugged her shoulders. He was always most amiable, most polite. One would say that she suspected nothing. But all the same, is it not so? The heart suffers, monsieur. Day by day I have watched Madame grow paler and thinner. She was not the same woman who arrived here a month ago. Monsieur, too, has changed. He also has had his worries. One could see that he was on the brink of a crisis of the nerves. And who could wonder, with an affair conducted such a fashion? No reticence, no discretion. Style Anglais, without doubt. I bounded indignantly in my seat, but the examining magistrate was continuing his questions, undistracted by side issues. You say that M. Renaud had not to let Madame d'Aubruil out. Had she left, then? Yes, monsieur. I heard them come out of the study and go to the door. Monsieur said good night and shut the door after her. What time was that? About 25 minutes after 10, monsieur. Do you know when M. Renaud went to bed? I heard him come up about 10 minutes after we did. The stair creaks so that one hears everyone who goes up and down. And that is all. You heard no sound of disturbance during the night. Nothing whatever, monsieur. Which of the servants came down the first in the morning? I did, monsieur. At once I saw the door swinging open. What about the other downstairs windows? Were they all fastened? Every one of them. There was nothing suspicious or out of place anywhere. Good, Francois, you can go. The old woman shuffled towards the door. On the threshold, she looked back. I will tell you one thing, monsieur, that Madame d'Aubruil, she is a bad one. Oh yes, one woman knows about another. She is a bad one, remember that. And shaking her head sagely, Francois left the room. Léonie Oulard called the magistrate. Léonie appeared dissolved in tears and inclined to be hysterical. M. Hortet dealt with her adroitly. Her evidence was mainly concerned with the discovery of her mistress gagged and bound, of which she gave rather an exaggerated account. She, like Francois, had heard nothing during the night. Her sister, Denise, succeeded her. She agreed that her master had changed greatly of late. Every day he became more and more morose. He ate less. He was always depressed. but Denise had her own theory. Without doubt, it was the mafia he had on his track. Two masked men, who else could it be? A terrible society, that. It is, of course, possible, said the magistrate smoothly. Now, my girl, was it you who admitted Madame d'Aubreuil to the house last night? Not last night, monsieur, the night before. But Francis has just told us that Madame d'Aubreuil was here last night. No, monsieur, a lady did come to see M. Renaud last night, but it was not Madame d'Aubreuil. Surprised, the magistrate insisted, but the girl held firm. She knew Madame d'Aubreuil perfectly by sight. This lady was dark also, but shorter and much younger. Nothing could shake her statement. Had you ever seen this lady before? Never, monsieur. And then the girl added diffidently, but I think she was English. English? Yes, monsieur. She asked for M. Renaud in quite good French, but the accent, one can always tell it NSC pas. Besides, when they came out of the study, they were speaking in English. Did you hear what they said? Could you understand it, I mean? Me, I speak the English very well, said Denise with pride. The lady was speaking too fast for me to catch what she said, but I heard monsieur's last words as he opened the door for her. She paused, and then repeated carefully and laboriously. Yes, yes, but for God's sake go now. Yes, yes, but for God's sake go now, repeated the magistrate. He dismissed Denise, and after a moment or two for consideration, recalled Francis. To her he propounded the question as to whether she had not made a mistake in fixing the night of Madame d'Aubreuil's visit. Francis, however, proved unexpectedly obstinate. It was last night that Madame d'Aubreuil had come. Without a doubt it was she. Denise wished to make herself interesting, voilà tout, so she had cooked up this fine tale about a strange lady, airing her knowledge of English too. Probably monsieur had never spoken that sentence in English at all, and even if he had, it proved nothing, for Madame d'Aubreuil spoke English perfectly, and generally used that language when talking to M. and Madame Renaud. You see, M. Jack, the son of monsieur, was usually here, and he spoke the French very badly. The magistrate did not insist. Instead, he inquired about the chauffeur and learned that only yesterday M. Renaud had declared that he was not likely to use the car, and that masters might just as well take a holiday. A perplexed frown was beginning to gather between Poirot's eyes. What is it? I whispered. He shook his head impatiently and asked a question. Pardon, M. Bex, but without doubt M. Renaud could drive the car himself. The commissary looked over at Francis, and the old woman replied promptly. No, monsieur did not drive himself. Poirot's frown deepened. I wish you would tell me what is worrying you, I said impatiently. See you not, in his letter M. Renaud speaks of sending the car for me to Calais. Perhaps he meant a hired car, I suggested. Doubtless that is so, but why hire a car when you have one of your own? Why choose yesterday to send away the chauffeur on a holiday suddenly at a moment's notice? Was it that for some reason he wanted him out of the way before we arrived? Chapter 4. The letter signed Bella. Francis had left the room. The magistrate was drumming thoughtfully on the table. M. Bex, he said at length, here we have directly conflicting testimony. Which are we to believe, Francis or Denise? Denise, said the commissary decidedly. It was she who let the visitor in. Francis is old and obstinate, and has evidently taken a dislike to Madame d'Aubreuil. Besides, our own knowledge tends to show that Renaud was entangled with another woman. Tynes, cried M. Hortet, we have forgotten to inform M. Poirot of that. He searched amongst the papers on the table and finally handed the one he was in search of to my friend. This letter, M. Poirot, we found in the pocket of the dead man's overcoat. Poirot took it and unfolded it. It was somewhat worn and crumbled, and was written in English in a rather unformed hand. My dearest one, why have you not written for so long? You do love me still, don't you? Your letters lately have been so different, cold and strange, and now this long silence. It makes me afraid if you were to stop loving me, but that's impossible. What a silly kid I am, always imagining things. But if you did stop loving me, I don't know what I should do, kill myself perhaps. I couldn't live without you. Sometimes I fancy another woman is coming between us. Let her look out, that's all, and you too. I'd as soon kill you as let her have you, I mean it. But there, I'm writing high-flown nonsense. You love me and I love you. Yes, love you, love you, love you. Your own adoring Bella. There was no address or date. Poirot handed it back with a grave face. And the assumption is M. le Juge. The examining magistrate shrugged his shoulders. Obviously M. Renaud was entangled with this Englishwoman Bella. He comes over here, meets Madame d'Aubreuil and starts an intrigue with her. He cools off to the other, and she instantly suspects something. This letter contains a distinct threat. M. Poirot, at first sight the case seemed simplicity itself. Jealousy, the fact that M. Renaud was stabbed in the back, seemed to point distinctly to its being a woman's crime. Poirot nodded. The stab in the back, yes, but not the grave. That was laborious work, hard work. No woman dug that grave, monsieur. That was a man's doing. The commissary exclaimed excitedly, "Yes, yes, you are right. We did not think of that." "As I said," continued M. Hortet, "at first sight the case seemed simple, but the masked men and the letter you received from M. Renaud complicate matters. Here we seem to have an entirely different set of circumstances, with no relationship between the two. As regards the letter written to yourself, do you think it is possible that it referred in any way to this Bella and her threats?" Poirot shook his head. "Hardly. A man like M. Renaud, who has led an adventurous life in out-of-the-way places, would not be likely to ask for protection against a woman." The examining magistrate nodded his head emphatically. "My view exactly. Then we must look for the explanation of the letter." "In Santiago," finished the commissary. "I shall cable without delay to the police in that city, requesting full details of the murdered man's life out there, his love affairs, his business transactions, his friendships, and any enmities he may have incurred. It will be strange if, after that, we do not hold a clue to his mysterious murder." The commissary looked round for approval. "Excellent," said Poirot appreciatively. "His wife, too, may be able to give us a pointer," added the magistrate. "You have found no other letters from this Bella amongst M. Renaud's effects?" asked Poirot. "No, of course one of our first proceedings was to search through his private papers in the study. We found nothing of interest, however. All seemed square and above board. The only thing at all out of the ordinary was his will. Here it is." Poirot ran through the document. "So, a legacy of £1,000 to Mr. Stoner. Who is he, by the way?" "M. Renaud's secretary. He remained in England, but was over here once or twice for a weekend. And everything else left unconditionally to his beloved wife, Eloise, simply drawn up, but perfectly legal, witnessed by the two servants, Denise and Francois. Nothing so very unusual about that." He handed it back. "Perhaps," began Bex, "you did not notice." "The date," twinkled Poirot. "But yes, I noticed it. A fortnight ago. Possibly it marks his first intimation of danger. Many rich men die intestate through never considering the likelihood of their demise. But it is dangerous to draw conclusions prematurely. It points, however, to his having a real liking and fondness for his wife, in spite of his amorous intrigues." "Yes," said M. Hortet doubtfully, "but it is possibly a little unfair on his son, since it leaves him entirely dependent on his mother. If she were to marry again, and her second husband obtained an ascendancy over her, this boy might never touch a penny of his father's money. Poirot shrugged his shoulders. Man is a vain animal. M. Renaud figured to himself, without doubt, that his widow would never marry again. As to the son, it may have been a wise precaution. To leave the money in his mother's hands. The sons of rich men are proverbially wild. It may be as you say. Now, M. Poirot, you would without doubt like to visit the scene of the crime. I am sorry that the body has been removed, but of course photographs have been taken from every conceivable angle and will be at your disposal as soon as they are available. I thank you, monsieur, for all your courtesy. The commissary rose. Come with me, messieurs. He opened the door and bowed ceremoniously to Poirot to precede him. Poirot, with equal politeness, drew back and bowed to the commissary. Monsieur, monsieur. At last, they got out into the hall. That room there, it is the study, Hein? Asked Poirot suddenly, nodding towards the door opposite. Yes, you would like to see it. He threw the door open as he spoke, and we entered. The room which M. Renaud had chosen for his own particular use was small, but furnished with great taste and comfort. A businesslike writing desk, with many pigeonholes, stood in the window. 2 large leather-covered armchairs faced the fireplace, and between them was a round table covered with the latest books and magazines. Bookshelves lined 2 of the walls, and at the end of the room opposite the window there was a handsome oak sideboard with a tantalus on top. The curtains and portiere were of a soft, dull green, and the carpet matched them in tone. Poirot stood a moment taking in the room, then he stepped forward, passed his hand lightly over the backs of the leather chairs, picked up a magazine from the table, and drew a finger gingerly over the surface of the oak sideboard. His face expressed complete approval. No dust? I asked with a smile. He beamed on me, appreciative of my knowledge of his peculiarities. Not a particle, mon ami, and for once perhaps it is a pity. His sharp, bird-like eyes darted here and there. Ah, he remarked suddenly, with an intonation of relief. Hearthrug is crooked, and he bent down to straighten it. Suddenly he uttered an exclamation and rose. In his hand he held a small fragment of paper. In France, as in England, he remarked, the domestics omit to sweep under the mats. Bex took the fragment from him, and I came closer to examine it. You recognize it, eh, Hastings? I shook my head, puzzled, and yet that particular shade of pink paper was very familiar. The commissary's mental processes were quicker than mine. A fragment of a check, he exclaimed. The piece of paper was roughly about 2 inches square. On it was written in ink the word Duveen. By N, said Bex, this check was payable to or drawn by one named Duveen. The former, I fancy, said Poirot, for if I am not mistaken, the handwriting is that of M. Renaud. That was soon established by comparing it with a memorandum from the desk. Dear me, murmured the commissary, with a crestfallen air, I really cannot imagine how I came to overlook this. Poirot laughed. The moral of that is, always look under the mats. My friend Hastings here will tell you that anything in the least crooked is a torment to me. As soon as I saw that the hearthrug was out of the straight, I said to myself, Tynes, the leg of the chair caught it in being pushed back. Possibly there may be something beneath it which the good Francois overlooked. Francois, or Denise or Leonie, whoever did this room, since there is no dust, the room must have been done this morning. I reconstruct the incident like this. Yesterday, possibly last night, M. Renaud drew a check to the order of someone named Duveen. Afterwards it was torn up and scattered on the floor. this morning, but M. Bex was already pulling impatiently at the bell. Francis answered it. Yes, there had been a lot of pieces of paper on the floor. What had she done with them? Put them in the kitchen stove, of course. What else? With a gesture of despair, Bex dismissed her. Then, his face lightening, he ran to the desk. In a minute he was hunting through the dead man's checkbook. Then he repeated his former gesture. The last counterful was blank. "Courage," cried Poirot, clapping him on the back. "Without doubt, Madame Renaud will be able to tell us all about this mysterious person named Duveen." The commissary's face cleared. "That is true. Let us proceed." As we turned to leave the room, Poirot remarked casually, "It was here that M. Renaud received his guest last night, eh?" "It was, but how did you know?" "By this, I found it on the back of the leather chair." And he held up between his finger and thumb a long black hair, a woman's hair. M. Bex took us out by the back of the house to where there was a small shed leaning against the house. He produced a key from his pocket and unlocked it. "The body is here. We moved it from the scene of the crime just before you arrived, as the photographers had done with it." He opened the door and we passed in. The murdered man lay on the ground with a sheet over him. M. Bex dexterously whipped off the covering. Renaud was a man of medium height, slender and lithe in figure. He looked about 50 years of age, and his dark hair was plentifully streaked with grey. He was clean-shaven with a long, thin nose and eyes set rather close together, and his skin was deeply bronzed, as that of a man who had spent most of his life beneath tropical skies. His lips were drawn back from his teeth, and an expression of absolute amazement and terror was stamped on the livid features. "One can see by his face that he was stabbed in the back," remarked Poirot. Very gently, he turned the dead man over. There, between the shoulder blades, staining the light fawn overcoat, was a round dark patch. In the middle of it there was a slit in the cloth. Poirot examined it narrowly. "Have you any idea with what weapon the crime was committed?" "It was left in the wound." The commissary reached down a large glass jar. In it was a small object that looked to me more like a paper knife than anything else. It had a black handle and a narrow shining blade. The whole thing was not more than 10 inches long. Poirot tested the discolored point gingerly with his finger-tip. "Ma foi, but it is sharp. A nice easy little tool for murder." "Unfortunately, we could find no trace of fingerprints on it," remarked Bex regretfully. "The murderer must have worn gloves." "Of course he did," said Poirot contemptuously. "Even in Santiago they know enough for that. The veriest amateur of an English mise knows it, thanks to the publicity the Bertillon system has been given in the press. All the same, it interests me very much that there were no fingerprints. It is so amazingly simple to leave the fingerprints of someone else, and then the police are happy." He shook his head. "I very much fear our criminal is not a man of method, either that or he was pressed for time, but we shall see." He let the body fall back into its original position. "He wore only underclothes under his overcoat, I see," he remarked. "Yes, the examining magistrate thinks that is rather a curious point." At this minute there was a tap on the door which Bex had closed after him. He strode forward and opened it. Francis was there. She endeavored to peep in with ghoulish curiosity. "Well, what is it?" demanded Bex impatiently. "Madame, she sends a message that she is much recovered and is quite ready to receive the examining magistrate." "Good," said M. Bex briskly. "Tell M. Hortet and say that we will come at once." Poirot lingered a moment, looking back towards the body. I thought for a moment that he was going to apostrophize it, to declare aloud his determination never to rest till he had discovered the murderer. But when he spoke, it was tamely and awkwardly, and his comment was ludicrously inappropriate to the solemnity of the moment. He wore his overcoat very long, he said constrainedly.